Today we're going to look at a couple Cisco routers, one from 1998 and one from 2009, that both have the same affliction. They can't boot into an operating system to do anything useful. Instead, upon power up, they just drop into something called ROMMON, or ROM monitor. I'll go over how to get a version of iOS, the operating system these things used, back on the machines and get them running again. We'll use something called a TFTP server to do this, which I'm hosting in what I'm calling the retro rack. So I'm going to use this as an excuse to do some housekeeping in there. I made a pretty critical error in my original rack configuration. I can't fit my hand all the way behind one of my patch panels, rendering most of the wires on the front useless. So we'll get a 2U patch panel in there, rearrange some things, and finally see if we can save these routers. Let's get into it. Today, I want to do a little housekeeping down here. I've got two of these Cisco routers I picked up over the past few months, and they both have the same problem. They don't have a copy of iOS on them. iOS is the operating system Cisco gear runs that actually lets you use the thing for its intended purpose, configure the interfaces, and actually set up networks. When you boot these up, you don't get iOS, you get the dreaded ROMMON. ROMMON, short for ROM monitor, is basically the firmware of these routers. It's baked in from the factory, and assuming there isn't some sort of catastrophic hardware problem, you'll always be able to get into it. I say dreaded because the device drops into ROMMON if you have a corrupt version of iOS, you've plugged in a broken interface adapter, basically whenever something bad has happened. But I want to see if I can get these things working today, so we'll go over how to get iOS back onto a machine that is stuck in ROMMON. On the top, we've got a little Cisco 2600 series router. This one is a 2620. And I've actually got its little brother. This is a 2610. And best I can tell, there is one critical difference between the two. They both come with a built-in Ethernet interface, but this one on the top, this is the 2610, it just says Ethernet 00. So that means that's 10 megabit per second Ethernet. But the 2620 down here says 10100 Ethernet 00. Meaning it can do 10 megabit, just like this one, and also what's called fast Ethernet, 100 megabits per second. That might sound wild, but the 2600 line came out all the way back in 1998, and fast Ethernet, or 100 megabit per second Ethernet, wasn't necessarily a guarantee back then. I got this from a viewer named Victor, so a huge thanks to him, and we'll try to tackle this one first and get it working. It'd be nice to have a 2600 with fast Ethernet in the lineup. I've also got this much newer 2900 series. This is a 2951. I picked this up from a viewer named Josh for, I want to say, 20 bucks. I was actually at his place buying a Sun Microsystems server rack. I have no idea what I'm going to do with that thing yet, so it's in pieces all over the basement and the garage. The wife loves it. This one has essentially the same issue, no version of iOS on it, but there are several different options for where you can actually store iOS, so we'll tackle this one second. Let's get a closer look at the 2600. Suppose we can start off by giving it a little bath here. It's been in Victor's garage, I suspect, and then it's been in my garage for months. Yeah, look at that. That is looking way better. These routers are modular. These 2600s, at least this one, has 2 slots. We'll take a look at those. And back in the late 90s, early 2000s, Cisco always had this, fill these slots with modularity, the Modularity Cafe. We'll go look at the archived version of that website when we're trying to get this thing working again. This thing came populated with 2 wicks. We've got a serial and a T1 DSU CSU card for T1 interconnectivity. You basically can't find one of these without one of those in there. I've got, like, I don't know, 10 of these T1 cards. But I don't have one of these serial connections. This is what was called I guess you would call it a high-speed serial interconnect. As I start going over these interface cards, you see I'm going to pull out a bunch of gear and keep talking about T1. So I figured I'd tell you what it is. T1 is a dedicated digital line from the telco provider. I think it was invented by Bell Labs for the Bell system back in the 1960s. It's capable of operating at 1.5 megabits per second, and it can be divided into what are called channels. They can either be data or voice, 24 of them, at least here in the US. I think it's a little different in Europe. I think it's called E1. I don't know, I'm not a European. It's very similar though. So basically you can use T1 to carry 24 phone calls, 24 voice phone calls, or, you know, half of it could be dedicated to data, half of it could be dedicated to phone calls, or just all data. And in most cases, that meant a connection over to the internet. If you grew up in the time when the internet was really taking off, like I did, T1 sort of has this mythical status. It was the first high-speed internet I had ever interacted with at a whopping 1.5 megabits per second. But that's what we're talking about here. T1 was a very common inter-office, across the city, across the state, what type of situation, for having a branch office, a local branch of a bank or something in a small town, and then over to headquarters where they've got all their actual compute infrastructure and everything. That's why on this older stuff you see a lot of these serial connections and these T1 CSU DSUs, very common back then in the 90s and into the 2000s as a way to connect disparate locations. And one final note, T1 operates over copper pairs. This is a T1 cable right here. There's only 4 wires in there, hence the Bell system origins. They were dealing with this constraint. They wanted to figure out how to cram voice channels and data into the existing telephone system. Now, the story with this serial connection here is that it was probably also used for T1 as well, just like this dedicated T1 DSU CSU. So I've got this ADTRAN TSU. Basically, you'd need additional equipment, and they had these awesome cables, really hefty, thick cables. This is a V25 connector, and it's got these massive pins on there. That's pretty typical for this T1 equipment. And then, of course, you go like this, and you got a leased line, a T1 line coming in from your telco provider, and you would have like a branch office over here, and somewhere else you'd have your main headquarters. I've actually got plenty of videos where I hooked up this exact setup, but I didn't have one of these serial connectors in the WIC form, I don't think. I do have some of these older Cisco 1600 series. I think these are late 90s as well, and they've actually got the serial port just built right in. Now here's a question I've always had. Did anyone just directly interconnect routers like this? I guess suppose you'd need some sort of crossover cable, but was that a legit setup to use these for something other than something like T1? So like interconnecting gear in the same rack? I think it's technically possible if I found the right cabling. But yeah, if you did this back in the day, is that something people did? These serial connections could support 2 megabit per second at their max synchronous speed. And I think you could also hook up like analog modems. I don't think it necessarily had to be T1. Got us all hooked up here. You interact with these Cisco units over a console port. It's just a serial connection that goes over an RJ45 cable. I've got this into a USB to serial converter, and then we've got power, of course. So let's fire it on, and we'll go take a look at ROMMON. It's fired up, and here's ROMMON. So basically, if you don't know a lot about the Cisco stuff, this is like a home labber's worst nightmare. You get this thing off of eBay, you've watched all these tutorials about iOS and how to set up your Cisco stuff, and you're just stuck at this weird thing called ROMMON. So this is like the firmware of the router. You can break into this on purpose when the router's booting up, and you can do things like reset a password, stuff like that. I'll do a video on that someday. I can't type anymore. I'm going to restart my session here. That was weird. Don't know what that was about. So you can type help, and we have some options in here to interact with the machine. The first thing I do if I'm troubleshooting an issue trying to boot into the operating system is you can do dev. This will show you all the devices that can store data or files on the machine. And you can see here we've got one device, the internal flash. It's called flash : and then you can look inside there. So we can say dir flash : and there's nothing. We have it, well, that's not true. There is a backup config file for iOS. No version of iOS, you would see this big, long file name with a .bin usually. So what this means is it is time for yet another iOS tutorial. So you already saw, we can say dev for device, see all the devices that could be storing a Cisco iOS image, and then of course we can dir the device name to see what's on there. If we do help, or you can also do question mark, just like in normal iOS, as you'll see, lots of other stuff. We want to look at set. Set is going to show you all the variables that exist. They're kind of like, you can think of these like environment variables. Well, I suppose they are environment variables if you're familiar with the command line interface on basically any operating system. But basically, we can do a set, and you see there's a bunch of stuff set already. IP address, TFTP, and if we do another question mark, there's a couple interesting options here. We've got this TFTP download, and right in the description there, TFTP image download. So we're going to set up something called, well, I already have something called a TFTP server, where I'm going to host a version of iOS that's compatible with this router, and we'll be able to download it to the router. We can also use a protocol called Xmodem. which is this console hosting a file, and over the serial connection, that console, that blue console cable I was showing you, we can actually transfer a file that way as well, but it is heinously slow. We'll see how into this I get. Maybe we'll try that as well. But first, we're gonna go with TFTP. So if we do that set again, you need to set a bunch of variables, and I can't remember if the previous owner had tried this already, but someone has already been trying to get a version of iOS on here. So they set the IP address of the router to this, they set the TFTP server where they were hosting an image of iOS to that, and then they had a TFTP file. Ours is going to look very similar to this one. Maybe what tripped them up, I don't know, is we've got a spelling error here in default gateway. We're going to have to reset that. So what we're going to do is fire up a TFTP server. We're going to host a bin. We'll go through and set all these variables for my network, and then we'll transfer the file over to the flash memory of this thing. And when we do that and reboot it, it should just boot right into iOS, assuming there's nothing critically wrong with this router. I don't actually know. Obviously, I haven't done this yet. But we have to do a little segue. I want to get this thing on a network hosted by what I'm calling the retro rack in the other room. It hosts a 10.0.0.0 network. That's where the TFTP server is accessible. But I need to do a little housekeeping. This is a clean up the lab video. So let's get in that room. This is the retro rack. At the bottom, I've got some bitchin' IBM P5 gear. In the middle, of course, we've got some Sun Microsystems Sunfires all racked up. And then right here is the heart of the operation. We're a Cisco shop, as you can see, for better or worse. The main router is a 7200 series VXR. And then we've got some 3550 and 3500 series gear here. This is the main aggregation switch, meaning all the other stuff connects up to it. It can do 1 gig. Which is pretty fast. So all these switches, this big guy, basically everything aggregates through here. This fiber connection goes to here. The switches are gigastacked. I've got a bunch of videos on that if you're curious what that means. Together, these these 3 guys right here. And then this one is actually something that can do inline power. So that is a way to deliver power to things like Cisco IP phones, that predates the power over Ethernet standard, and you would use that for obviously the Cisco IP phones and other stuff. I've got a video on that, and there will be videos on that in the future. Now, I made a couple mistakes when I racked this up. The first one is this switch here, which I have everything flowing through, is not as good, not as powerful. It's just not as good of a switch as this one that's sitting here doing nothing. So the first thing I want to do in this little housekeeping video, I want to swap the positions. I only want to turn this thing on when I need inline power for things like the phones. And this one's going to be the main switch for everything else. So right now there's some other networking flowing through this, so I have to fire this guy on whenever I want to do a bunch of stuff like this TFTP server. I promise we're gonna bring this full circle back to that 2600. Another mistake I made, which didn't bother me too much, if I'm being honest, this aggregation switch is really frustrating. It's 1.5 U's. So you see these lines right here? That is a U. It stands for rack unit. It's a standard height. And this thing is 1.5 of them. And what I did for aesthetics is I just bumped it up against this, but then you have this like half U you're dealing with. And a lot of people in previous videos were pretty unhappy that all the stuff under that doesn't line up with the U marks. You can see that, like, here's my patch panel here, and it's got part of it is messing with this U mark. That doesn't bother me too much, but I think in the end they're probably right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to move this down so that it lines up with the bottom of this. I'm not explaining this very well, but you'll see in a second. Basically, I'm going to have a gap here, and that'll be nice because I can flow things like the fiber connect up to the router through that gap instead of bringing it around like I am today. And then, of course, I've got this other problem where this thing isn't hooked up to anything. I was going to throw another one of these. These are called patch panels. They just flow cables out the back, and I can plug these into the switch. The whole point is that you should be able to remove an appliance, in this case the switch, without having to uncable a whole lot of other stuff. So the patch panel makes it so I can pull out all these cables, pull the switch out, and I don't have to worry about a bunch of crossover or anything like that. And it's convenient to just plug stuff in to the back, but I made another critical error. I'll explain that later. So the plan is we're going to get the big dog in here. This is a 48 8-port patch panel, 2U. It's going to be between the two switches. Both of them are going to be wired up like this, one going this way, one going the other way. And that way I can pull both appliances out if I need to. In this case, I have to pull everything out, but you'll see. And then the most critical error I made was I've got a 1U patch panel right here. And so you can see I've plugged a bunch of stuff into it, but my hand doesn't fit. That's as far as I can get my hand in between these two things. So everything in the middle, I can't actually access. You wouldn't usually do things like this, but I'm kind of going for like, I just like how it looks. So the dream here is with the 2U patch panel, I'll have no problem getting my hand in there, getting to these keystones in the middle. These are amazing. You buy these on Amazon, they come with these things called keystones. You can actually pop these out and it's like fully populated. They're not expensive, but they're not cheap either. So that's a pretty nice option. So anyway, long story short, we need to power all this stuff up to get to the TFTP server. And I'm gonna use this as a nice excuse to clean up the rack a little bit. We're gonna swap these switches because I want to use this one in regular operation. I only want to use this one for IP phones and anything that requires inline power. We're going to drop this a little bit. Once the 4-port patch panel is in there and this one's out, I think this whole thing is going to be filled all the way to the Sunfire here, except for a little gap at the top, and I'm not happy about it because I like having all this stuff flush, but I'll figure that out in the future. So basically, I'm going to get to work rearranging all this stuff. I'm going to have to drop this switch. I'm going to have to move everything, actually. I'll bring you back after I get this one lowered, and then we'll get everything racked up and we'll recable. Little pro tip, this racking hardware is very, very strong. So this thing's quite heavy. It's the heaviest one I'm going to have to deal with. But you can take the top bolts out, and as you can see, it's such strong metal, and the bolts are so strong, the cage is so strong, the rack, that it can rest, you know, gravity and everything, and these bolts are enough to hold it in. So now I'll bring you along. Luckily, I have space. It's going to get trickier the lower we get as we rearrange everything, but this thing's going to get real heavy. I think it wasn't as bad as I thought putting in. So I'm putting a lot of pressure with my left hand, keeping this thing up. That screw is basically out. And I'm essentially holding it up with my hand right now. Okay, that one is free. And we're basically gonna move, Jesus. Oh my God. I think I have like the wrong ears on this thing or something. Anyway, it's fine where it is. I'm gonna have to redo these cage bolts, and I need to kind of decide where I need to put this thing. I think something like this. I'll bring you back in a second. Not gonna lie to you, had a couple miscalculations, blew the faceplate off. That's known. That's what the tape's for. It's in now with one bolt on each side. So what I want to do is get this as high as I can because I have this wasted space up here, and that's what I was kind of trying to avoid the first time. But that's okay. It's as high as it'll go now. I will continue. Okay, we're looking good, and in a rare win for me, my calculations were correct. Let me tell you. This is going to go here, and that last switch, we're going to try to sneak it in right here, hopefully. Okay, the dream is coming together. I checked this. I was pushing everything up as far as I could because I'm going to have this ugly gap here anyway, and I want to be able to slide this in and out. That was just my screwdriver falling off the end. That is more stuff falling off the end. This is all smooth. Everything's cool there. So that was something I was a little worried about. All good. This gap will serve a purpose because I can bring in stuff like this and not having it wrap around the rack. And now let's get this all cabled up. So it's a little awkward with the layout of these particular switches. So you can start with these short cables at first. And I really like these thin patch cables. Highly recommend these. But eventually, you know, it's just not going to reach. And so you have to use longer ones to get the rest of the way. But it ends up looking pretty good. So I'm going to wire all this up. Right here is where it has to start getting a little longer so you can actually reach the end of the patch panel. And there we go. That is looking really good. We'll do the same thing for this guy finally, and he'll be officially always connected. looking really, really good. Let's deal with the gigastat cables here. These interconnect all of this equipment, and they fell off the rack, so I can't really remember how I had them wired, but something to this effect, I think. Will it reach? Yes. So I just have to adjust where this is. Maybe I can sneak it on that little clip for now. Anyway, good enough. Look at that. That is nice looking. Oh yeah, that is looking awesome. I've got all the back wired in with the power and the remote management stuff. We of course have this gap, but it's useful. And look at all the room for activities in here. I can get my hand in here, plug in any cable I need to into the patch panel. I've got everything wired back up. Let's power this stuff up so we can get a TFTP server and get back to the point of this video. Everything is coming online here. With all that out of the way, let's see if we can save this router. This is an Ubuntu VM that I have set up as a TFTP server. You can find tons of tutorials online about how to set up various TFTP servers from beginner to advanced. Mine's somewhere in the middle. And this is the folder that is serving all the files over TFTP. The 2600 iOS bin files start with C2600. Here's all the ones I've got in there. I think we're going to go with this one. This is iOS 12.2. So we're going to try to get this thing on here. We need to know the IP address of this. This thing is on the retro rack on a 10.0.0 network. So let's do an IPA, and it is sitting at 10.0.0.105. So I'll remember that. Back over in ROMMON on the 2600, we're going to issue a set. And remember, all this stuff has already been set up. We need to point this at my network and the file we would like to transfer from that TFTP server I was just showing you. Here are the values we're going to use. We're going to set the IP of the router, the 2600 in this case. I know this .106 is available, the default gateway, the TFTP server, this 105 is the VM we were just looking at, which is hosting this TFTP file, the copy of iOS we're going to hope works on this thing. So I'll get these entered in just like that, and I hope if we do another set, maybe that's fine. So I'm using the uppercase. I don't know if iOS cares. Well, it must, because otherwise it wouldn't be showing me this lowercase stuff. I think you can unset some stuff. Yep, unset. No surprise there. So let's unset IP address and just see if that works. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to unset all the old variables. Did that. Let's issue a set. Now we just have our stuff. Maybe that's what tripped up the last guy that was trying to do this, is maybe they do need to be uppercase. I don't know. Because honestly, the default gateway being misspelled, I don't think it really matters in this case because we're on the same network. At any rate, let's plug the router in. This yellow cable goes into those switches we were just re-racking together on the retro rack network. And right when I plugged it in, we have 100 megabit and a link light up. That is a really promising sign. Back over on ROMMON, let's do a help command again. And we want this TFTP download. I believe if we issue this, it's going to listen to those environment variables we just set. TFTP download. Yes, it is. Perfect, so it picked these up. It's got the right settings. And it's warning us that the flash will be lost if anything's on there. That is totally fine because we don't have anything interesting on there anyway. And with any luck, it's going to start transferring a file. Otherwise, we're going to have to do some network debugging here. Yes. That dot right there is a progress indicator. This might take a while. There we go, 2 dots. We're cruising. That's just gonna spit out some dots as it's transferring the file. I'll bring you back when it's done. Got too excited. ARP address resolution for 10.0.0.5 timed out. It can't find my TFTP server. Let me make sure this is actually on the network I think it's supposed to be plugged into. It's kind of a shame they don't give you a ping command. That would be very useful so I could see if I could reach that network. Wow, I got it working after trying a bunch of different stuff. Those dots we were seeing earlier were actually ARP attempts. It's trying to get the MAC address of the TFTP server. It finally succeeded, and there it goes, copying the bin to flash. You probably won't have to deal with what I was dealing with here, but while it's doing that, it's odd. I can hear clicking noises every time this is blinking and erasing some of the flash. It's kind of weird. So I was looking through the Cisco docs, and there is this TFTP retry count. it defaults to 7. I set it to 20, and that was enough for it to get the ARP for some reason. I did a bunch of other stuff that had no effect and wasn't necessary. So if you're getting these ARP failures and you're pretty confident that your network is sound and it's on the right one, you can check out this TFTP retry count. That's pretty nice. I was getting nervous. So the flash has been erased, and now it's programming the flash with the bin. I'm 99% sure this bin will work on this router. I didn't actually look it up. I'm pretty sure this is what I have on my other 2600. I'll let this finish, might take a moment. And it's done. Let's do a dir flash colon. And right there, we have the bin we just transferred over. I think it's reset. It's gonna restart the router, and hopefully it'll just boot into iOS 12.2. Let's see. Otherwise, this thing probably has some more serious problems. This is a good sign. Self-decompressing image. It's loading up that bin we just put in the flash memory. I'm feeling relatively good about this. It's coming up. We got Cisco iOS version 12.2. It knows it's got 2 serial network interfaces, the serial card and T1. T1's also called serial. And then a fast Ethernet interface. This is a really good sign. I'm going to say no to the initial configuration. Look at this. Should be called router. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Here we are. We can get into privilege mode. I am going to write out this blank factory configuration. And there we go. We have saved this router. I've done this before a couple times, but not on this particular router, so I didn't know the state it was in. Really exciting. I've never had to bump up that TFTP timeout before, so that's a good trick to have up your sleeve. Also, it didn't really end up helping, but it was nice to see. There's a TFTP verbose setting, and you can set it to the number 2, and it tells you everything about what it's doing. I happened to set this and the retry count at the same time, but worked out super nice. I think I said we'd take a look at the Modularity Cafe website they were advertising on that sticker on the lid. And here it is from 2001, an absolute beauty. They're going for this cafe motif. We've got this guy serving what appears to be a network appliance. Today's specials, let's look at that. Currently working on new quarterly special, okay. Nothing here in 2001. This Modularity Cafe flash demo is not archived, I am sad to say. I looked all over the site to see if it had been scraped, and it's not there, which is a shame. I'm sure that thing was great. They got a screensaver, which was archived. I don't know if I feel like dealing. Yes, I do. Let's download this thing. Got it over on a Windows XP VM. Let's see what the Modularity Cafe screensaver was all about. Unknown publisher, run. Advanced computer graphics. Oh, here we go. It's like a demo of some sort. Let's find out. It's installing Flash ActiveX control. Maybe this is the Swift. They just loaded up in a little app on your computer. That would be great. What could go wrong? Successfully installed. Okay. Oh, it is a Swift file. Can I just play that? Yeah, here it is. Yes. I don't have sound on this machine. What a beauty. I wonder if I can drag that Swift file over to my modern desktop here. Well, I couldn't get it to play sound on my actual desktop either. Yeah, it's literally just a screensaver. Telling you about the Modularity Cafe. All right, that's enough of this. Gotta love it though. So we've saved this one. Let's see if we can restore the bigger guy. And when I say bigger, I'm not kidding. It is absolutely massive compared to this little 2620. It's quite a bit newer and much more capable. This thing came out in 2009, and as with all Cisco equipment, it enjoyed a very healthy lifespan. It went out of service in 2022, and this particular unit was actually manufactured in February of 2017. So yeah, this is a lot newer than the stuff I typically like to deal with, but I have to admit, they're very useful. They're very capable. If you can pick one up for 20 bucks, I mean, whatever. They just went out of service 3 years ago. So I suspect we're gonna start getting flooded with these on eBay, or maybe we already have and I'm past it. I don't know. It's probably not too hard to find one of these for an okay deal, except that they are ridiculously heavy. Like surprisingly heavy. So quite a bit newer. Those cards that were in the old one are called wicks. These are wicks. And you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then these 2 massive bays for additional expansion. Came with onboard gigabit Ethernet, 2 of them, as well as an SFP port right here, also gigabit, I believe. We've got the regular console port and then a USB console port. We'll just be using the regular one today. Now this one also has the same problem. It's going to drop us right into ROMMON, a much newer version of ROMMON, as we'll see. It has no iOS version, and the reason is there's no internal flash to store it on. There's 4 external options. 2 of them are these compact flash slots right here. Forgive my tool choice here, but yeah, you can put a compact flash in there. This one has also sustained some damage, but I don't think that's a big deal. Cosmetic. Both of these slots are empty, as we'll see. And then over here we've got 2 USB slots. I know ROMMON can see these. I have no idea if you can actually store the iOS image on a USB stick. That would be pretty precarious down here anyway, because I'm always moving this stuff around and it would be, you know, hanging off the back and I'd snap it. But what I'd really like to do is see if we can boot iOS on a USB stick on these things. I have no idea if that is an option. We're going to try that first. Not that the comparison matters at all, but I just really want to show how much bigger it is than this guy. And here's my hand. I have pretty big hands. I'm like 6'1". This thing is just huge. I mean, it's 2U, obviously. It's twice as tall as this one. We learned about rack units earlier. But it's just so long. And it's really heavy. It's like totally metal. Solid construction. Pretty impressive. I suppose we should give it the same respect we showed the 2600. It's a little dirty. It's kind of like this like matte, there's like a texture to the finish. It's pretty nice. So anyway, we'll just get this good enough. Get a little bit of the dust off here. Yeah, it's a pretty nice looking machine, if I'm being honest. There were clearly like some stickers on it or something, so we've got this goo, and I'm actually making it worse with the paper towel. It's just sticking to the stuff, but the dust is off there now. And yeah, pretty nice looking unit on the console, and right away we're in ROMMON. I think this is going to be really common with these things because they don't appear to have any onboard flash. It's quite a bit louder than the other one, but it's got these variable speed fans, so they kind of rev up and down and then kind of settle down, but it's definitely louder. So let's do a dev, just like before, and you can see, oh my gosh, I'm completely incorrect. I think that's the onboard flash. Flash 0 and flash 1 were the compact flash I was showing you. And then we've got the USB flash. So what's on flash? Cannot open device. I wonder if there is a compact flash card inside of it. Let's open it up. This is exciting. Let's power it down and get the power out here. I think I've been in one of these before. I have 2 of these. One works, and this one, well, I mean, it probably will work, but it just doesn't have iOS on it. Just 3 screws on the back, as I recall. Got those out. It's meant to be user serviced because there's expansion inside. Whoa, just huge. So here are the RAM slots. I think it was spitting out 512K of RAM. So wrong. It has a gig of RAM. Those are 2 512 megabyte sticks. These are PVDM slots, so you can do voice channels. So you could have T1 bringing in, you know, 20 plus voice channels, and you need the PVDMs to deal with that. I'm not worried about that. I was kind of half expecting to see a compact flash slot in here because it was saying there should have been one. It's kind of weird. Here are the compact flash slots off the back, those lids I was popping off. So yeah, I was kind of expecting to see one in here because ROMMON thinks there should be one, but whatever, that's fine. I was going to try the USB anyway. Actually, all that was going on there is flash is an alias for flash 0. So you can see both flash 0 and flash point at the same device, compact flash 0. So you can just use them interchangeably. It's the port on the back. I also noticed there's this boot flash, and if we try to look at it, it's complaining that the device does not contain a valid file system. So I don't know if that just needs to be formatted in some way and there is an internal flash sitting on that board somewhere, or some devices don't have it. I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments. Look how clean this thing is. It's like pristine. We got a clock battery here that's soldered in. Nice. That'll be a nice problem for 10 years from now when someone's making YouTube videos about retro routers. Okay, but the whole point here is to see if we can boot from USB. So let's find a USB stick. Oh my gosh. I was reading that those are USB 2.0 slots. So some of these are too new. I think, pretty sure this rando here is 2.0 or older. So we'll get this in USB 0, USB number 0, and we'll power back up. Back up, we're in good old ROMMON. Let's do a dev, and it's called USB flash 0. So let's do a dir USB flash 0. It's loading. I wasn't expecting that. Yeah, these are some drivers. I was messing around with something else on that USB stick a long time ago. Yeah, so it can read a USB stick. I guess what we're going to do is let's get a bin of iOS for this machine on that USB stick. I've got a copy of iOS for that 2951 on the USB stick here, and a question that's going to be asked, or a problem you're going to have, is finding these iOS versions, and they're out there. It's not that hard. By that I mean you should have a certified Cisco contract, and email Cisco about it. Put that USB stick back in, and let's do another one. USB flash 0. We're going to look at the contents, and there it is. I don't know how to get it to boot from this. Let's just not look up any documentation and tell it to reset. Let's see if it just looks at all the devices and tries to find a bin. That would be interesting. I still also don't know if you can even boot from USB. I have some compact flash. You can for sure boot from those. We'll throw those on there if we need to. Yeah, that didn't work. Okay, I'm going to do a little research. As is tradition, 5 seconds of research on Google. Boot USB flash 0, and then the bin. That must be a real command. Oh yeah, okay. No! Invalid image for platform. I think that's okay. What does that mean? Probably means exactly what it says. It's not a compatible version of iOS. So I put one that hopefully is. So you can see the previous one said C2900. This one specifically says C2951. Let's try that again. And we'll boot from this other version of iOS I found. We're getting further. It's like 40 seconds later. USB 2.0 is a lot slower than we all remember it. I think it's going to take quite a while. I think it takes the iOS image and puts it into memory. I'm fairly certain. And then everything's, cruising pretty good, and it's not pounding that USB stick all the time. I'll be back if this succeeds or fails. About a minute later, we've got iOS image load test. That seems good. There's a little red light on the back of the USB stick, and it is busy. So yeah, here we go. This is great. This thing is booted into iOS. That was really easy. It is slow though. We are paying the penalty for that USB drive, I think. I don't even know if that USB drive is even 2.0, but usually this part where I said no, I don't know, takes seconds, and that was pretty rough, but we're in. So this one works just fine. It's been recovered. So this one is looking good. That's as far as I'm going to go with it in this video, because I just wanted to know if it worked. I was curious about the USB boot thing. Ideally, I'm just going to throw a compact flash in one of these, and then I don't have this dangling off the end. But if you pick up one of these for a good deal, that's a nice option, because you could get one of those USB flash drives that's, like 5 millimeters deep or whatever. Throw that on there, and you're good to go. This was just FAT32 formatted, at least for this machine. That was totally fine and what it expected, and it's able to boot from USB no problem. That is really nice compared to some of the older gear that needs this, or even worse, one of these flash cards. And back in the older Cisco era, these were like custom file formats or something. You couldn't just pop this into a converter and throw iOS on there. You had to do the network stuff or over the serial. This is really nice to just be able to pop it in your modern machine, put iOS on there, bam, you're up and running. This was one of those projects where every time I walked by these things on the shelf, I was in the back of my mind thinking, do they work? Do they work? So I'm glad I just put them on the bench and figured it out. And hopefully it was useful if you've gotten into this situation yourself, or you find yourself in this situation in the future where you don't have iOS. Or I've seen it where I've accidentally put a version of iOS, tried to install a version of iOS that's like too big, so there's not enough memory on the machine, and it'll just hop into ROMMON and it can't load. And then you can get a new version, a correct version on there with the exact same procedure I just showed you. I think it's going to be pretty common for this newer gear to come without iOS, especially this one does not seem to have internal storage. When these are decommissioned, the easiest thing for the IT folks to do is just rip out all the USB sticks and the compact flash instead of having to, wipe it and factory reset it. So I think that's going to be pretty common in this line of Cisco gear, and it is a solvable problem, as you saw. Also a great excuse to make the retro rack a lot more functional. I'm really happy with the re-racking we did in there. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you enjoyed following along. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's the best way to help the channel grow. And I've also got a Patreon where I post behind the scenes type videos and whatever else I'm tinkering with. Thanks once again, and I'll see you in the next video.